Hi, I'm Jeff Krellinston. I'm publisher and CEO of Research Money. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. It's called Co-Creating Canada's Future, Youth Perspectives on Canada's 7 federal missions. And it's brought to you by Research Money, the Institute for Collaborative Innovation, and the Canadian Science Policy Centre, CSPC. As we gather virtually for this national webinar, we acknowledge that Ottawa and Meaford, the land on which the Institute for Collaborative Innovation, CSPC, and Research Money are based, is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We recognize that all of you participants, are joining us from many places. Each has its own histories, treaties, and Indigenous communities. So we encourage everyone to take a moment to reflect on the land you're joining from and the enduring relationships Indigenous peoples maintain with their territories. Now, last year, Research Money was a conference partner at CSPC, and we participated in the CSPC Youth Symposium. We organized a workshop, Innovating the Youth Entrepreneurship Ecosystem, where we looked at what people were doing and what the challenges they were facing. We had youth, we had academics, faculty, and we had government people. And two things struck me. One, the youth delegates had unique insights based on their lived experience as university students interested in entrepreneurship and non-academic careers. And the second thing I noticed was that the academics and the government delegates hadn't realized what youth were going through. That's why we decided to host this webinar, to bring the voice of early career youth into these important policy discussions. So I want to thank CSPC for giving us this opportunity, and to Alex Zielinski and ICI for pulling this webinar together. It was a lot of work, but it worked. So Alex will be moderating. So I'll turn off my video now and I hand it over to you, Alex. Take it away.
Thank you, Jeff, for opening that up. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Alex. I am an analyst with the Institute for Collaborative Innovation, and I will be moderating today's discussion. To give our audience a quick idea of the run plan for today, I'll introduce our speakers today. We'll then proceed to two quick engagement polls, which will really help set the landscape for our discussion, help understand where there is, alignment on the 7 federal missions across our audience and where we might see a bit of a disconnect. From there, we will dive into our discussion with our speakers. And yes, a demographic poll has just been dropped in the chat. So if everybody could take a moment to answer that as well. But as we go through our discussion, there will be one more poll at the very end, and I will pass it back to Mehrdad to close things off for us. But without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. First, we're joined by Ella Wiggins. Ella is a business development specialist for communications technology at Invest Ottawa, supporting growth in Ottawa's telecom sector and advancing innovation in semiconductor, optics, and photonics spaces. They collaborate with companies, government, and academia to foster partnerships that strengthen Canada's innovation economy, which is becoming more important than ever before. Ella is passionate about democracy, public service, empowering youth voices to help shape Canada's future. Next, we have Drayton Molendabigwi Jabo. Drayton is a Rwandan Canadian entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of the Novus Group, which is an Ottawa-based innovation firm he founded in 2021. He leads a team of approximately 25, including youth innovators. He drives interdisciplinary, socially impactful projects, which previously have included mental health QR sticker campaigns and AI-powered market insight tools for entrepreneurs. His leadership has earned him the RBC Spirit of Capital Youth Award and Ottawa's Youth Immigrant Entrepreneurship Award. Driven by a passion for innovation and possibility, Drayton is a key player in helping shape Canada's mission-driven future. We're also joined by Anthony Valenti. Anthony's career is defined by dedication to passion and a people-first philosophy, with extensive experience advising C-suite executive, entrepreneurs, community leaders, and political candidates. He brings expertise in brand strategy, strategic communications, risk management, and stakeholder engagement. Anthony currently serves as the chairman and CEO of SVHL, and he is the founder of the Valenti Corporation, while also contributing to several board of directors. And last but not least, we're also joined by Dana Kramer. She is the founder, president, and CEO of the Young Digital Leaders of Canada, which is recognized by the United Nations Internet Governance Forum as Canada's National Youth IGF Coordinator. She has also founded and coordinated the World Summit on Information Society Youth Caucus, which is advocating for youth recognition in future global technology governance agreements at the United Nations. Dana is currently completing her PhD at Toronto Metropolitan and York Universities, where she studies politics and internet governance. So, welcome to all our speakers, and I'm excited to hear from everyone. And as mentioned, now we're going to dive into two of our engagement polls here. I'm going to share my screen momentarily, and our audience will have an option to join via a QR code or go to slido.com and enter the code you see on the screen. So, as mentioned, these first two questions are really to help gauge where there is alignment amongst our audience and where we might see a bit of a disconnect. So I'll leave that up for about a minute. And if people are having trouble seeing it, just let me know in the chat, but it should be up. And there's quite a bit of reading involved in this one, so I'll let the results come in. And for those of you who might not be able to answer the question, it is essentially asking which of the seven federal missions most directly impacts your daily life or work and requires urgent action within the short term, which in this case is defined as the next 1 or 2 years. And again, to reiterate, the seven federal missions were outlined in a mandate letter by Prime Minister Carney, which was released in May, that again capture areas such as affordability, housing, innovation, global competitiveness, all of which we'll dive into in our discussion. But as I'm seeing, it seems that the top result right now is attracting the best talent in the world to help rebuild our economy while returning our overall immigration rates to sustainable levels. And as I've said that, affordable housing has matched it. So it seems that right now, those two areas that are kind of the most urgent for our audience, with other mission areas coming in third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh place. All right. So what I'll do now is I will proceed to our next engagement item, which is a word cloud. So in this case, I will ask our audience to just in one word or phrase, what do you see as the biggest barrier to Canada making progress on these federal missions? So for those who might not have done a word cloud before, words that are submitted multiple times will appear more central and larger, whereas words that are submitted a little less frequently and are more unique will appear smaller and be more of outliers. So again, we'll give a minute or so. United States. All right, straight to the point. Definitely something that's been a very buzz topic these past few months. Leadership. All right, collaboration over jurisdictional boundaries, infrastructure, civic engagement. But United States seems to be taking the cake across the board. We still have seven participants typing, so I'll give it about 30 more seconds. We have policy, youth opportunities, not taking enough risk aversion, I think has been a recurring topic across the past couple of years of panels I've attended and been a part of, and I think will continue to be a big item. Bureaucracy, productivity, lack of competitiveness has increased in size, lack of innovation, bad administration, lack of opportunities, lack of scale support, data-driven policies, money, provincial versus federal jurisdiction. All really, really good insights. So I appreciate all of our 22 participants who have shared here. And to our speakers, I hope you're ready to build on some of these items here throughout our segments. That being said, I will now dive right into our first segment, which I will pull up momentarily, and that will be on again housing, public service, and affordability. So again, this is grouping thematic areas of the seven federal missions. As for questions and answers, instead of one large Q&A period at the end, please submit questions that are specific to each segment. As we reach the end of each segment, I will select 1 to 2 questions based on the amount of time we have left and which are most relevant to the discussion being had. And if we do have extra time at the very end, we will return to answer some more questions. That being said, I will open segment one up with our first question, which I will pose to Anthony here. So, as we just saw in that word cloud, housing, I think, has increasingly become more and more and more of a concern, especially for youth. What would it take for federal housing policy to genuinely reflect youth needs, from renters to first-time buyers to those unhoused? How can we better lean into what youth of today need from a policy perspective? But I'll turn it over to you, Anthony.
Great. Well, thank you, Alex, for the question, and thank you to everyone who's here, took the time out of their day to be here today. This is a very important topic, and you have a great suite of panelists up ahead, notwithstanding myself. So I think first and foremost is the answer lies within the question itself, and I think it's important to keep that in mind as we're discussing. Is it begins with consideration, and I've attended a variety of events and been on panels and attended panels where you have speakers who fail to grasp the needs of young people. And the reality is that we are one of the largest generations, and we are the largest generations currently looking for housing. And so it's very important to listen to young people, and it's very important to have the space in order to do so. Taking a solutions oriented approach to this question, I think that the market has not sufficiently adapted to the needs of young people these days. There's been a lot of talk about 15-minute communities in the last few years. It's been a very hot topic amidst municipal elections. Four units as of right has been a big thing here in Ontario. I think it's very important to consider that young people are adapting. More than ever, more and more young people are living with roommates. More and more young people are in housing units that have been sliced and diced, and they might be in a basement with two other roommates, and they're content with that. It's a case of cost savings. All of this goes hand in hand with the other struggles that young people are facing with job insecurity and the current economic situation with unaffordability generally. So it's very important as we're talking about affordability for housing for young people. It's very important to take into consideration the other struggles that young people are facing, but more importantly, how young people have still managed to overcome those challenges. I think you're on mute, Alex.
Just a follow-up from there. Do you think do you think it's going to be provincial adaptation that might, draw people to certain regions or certain areas, or do you think this requires kind of a federal blanket approach? And again, I think none of us have a crystal ball here, but if, you did mention that, youth are adapting, if a solution was to appear, what do you think youth might lean towards? Would it be, modular housing? As you mentioned, do you think people are going to kind of have more communal living spaces, which, is not something I considered, but I do know a lot of people that, are in their 30s living with their friends. They're single, not married, and they have prioritized, having their own space over maybe having a spouse, which again is showing that adaptation. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I think we're already seeing the beginnings of that change. You know, the federal government has come out recently and announced Build Canada Homes, a new agency that is dedicated to building affordable housing. I think that is a great first step. What I would like to see as part of BCH's mandate, and if there's anyone here from the Canada Lands Company or BCH on the line, I'll be happy to give you my phone number. I'd love to see a youth advisory committee as part of BCH's mandate. I would love to see young people. I know of many young people who are passionate housing advocates. They're already doing the work. They're already speaking with young people. And some of them aren't even entirely youth focused. That's the other important consideration. Young people are not only doing services for young people, they are young people taking on leadership roles generally. So we have that talent here. We have the people, we have the expertise. They need to be brought to the table specifically on housing. And what I would love to see from the federal government is BCH having a youth advisory committee, council, whatever it would end up being called. That would be first and foremost, so that youth can really be present to shape policy, shape the important decisions, and ensure that those voices are not discounted. I think on the topic of jurisdiction, I think it's very important to consider that in Canada, we do have one might used to say strict lines on intergovernmental jurisdictions, but they tend to get but there are certain levels of government that are responsible for certain things. And I think that has exacerbated this crisis. I think that the failure of all jurisdictions to come together in some way and agree on a way forward has been part of the issue that we are currently facing. And quite frankly, Alex, there's no end in sight there. There are certain lines that are drawn. There are certain policies and bylaws that are in place that are very difficult to change. And, you know, we could sit here all day and debate the relevance of those policies and bylaws. The reality is they're in place and we have to operate within the framework that we're currently in. And I think we're seeing the federal government try to take that unitarian approach with Build Canada Homes. I look forward to seeing what is actually going to come of it and some firm numbers around what its initial projects are going to look like. We know that it's going to be about 45,000 homes, but what form are those homes going to be taking? Are we looking at multi-unit residential apartment buildings? Are we looking at mixed use dwelling? Like, we need more information in order to properly assess how this is going to affect young people. So I would say interjurisdictional collaboration is key to getting through this, but we need to make sure that youth voices are at the table.
Agreed with you there, Anthony. Thank you for that follow-up. We'll now shift to public service components of the 7 federal mission areas, and I'll pose this question to Ella first, and then Dana, I know you also expressed interest, so I'd love you to follow up there. But many public services were designed decades ago, and I'm curious from your perspective, what would a youth informed redesign of healthcare, education, or employment services look like? Or even if there's something else out there that you think could really benefit from youth redesign, what might that be, and what might youth involvement look like?
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for the question as well. I want to look at it from a top-down perspective of how, from a bureaucratic lens, it can be simplified for youth growing up in the system. I'd start by making government work together and not in pieces, and that's at all 3 levels. Right now, every part of government has their own systems, logins, forms, portals, you name it. Each one does something very useful, but they don't necessarily talk to each other. And you spend so much of your time logging in, updating details, reading information, et cetera, et cetera. And for youth really starting that life and career point in their journey, there needs to be a streamlined service for it all. In truth, I think it's an excellent opportunity maybe for post-secondary institutions or a youth advisory committee to be present on what that would look like, since it would be really us as youth inheriting the burden of bureaucracy, and it needs to be accessible and secure in a digital world. We've seen that with other countries that have already figured it out, like Estonia. They built a national digital backbone called X-Road. It connects every public service from healthcare to taxes through one secure platform. Denmark and Singapore have done the same, giving citizens a single trusted digital ID that they can use for pretty much everything. And the result has been that things are faster, safer, and there's a lot more accountability within it. In Canada, we're partway there. We have some great foundations, provincial health portals, CRA accounts, even a few digital ID pilots, but they're all operating in very distinct silos. As an youth-informed redesign, I think that would be more focusing in a more collaborative way in connecting those dots. It'd be like building a national rail system for public service, one set of secure tracks that at every level of government can run on, so that Canada and Canadians aren't stuck switching trains at every border. And that would be the secure digital identity, maybe a personalized digital wallet, and all of these systems need to have that interoperability. Because if you don't, then you're just starting from scratch, basically. And there's also then the consideration that you have to make it accessible and inclusive. A connected digital ecosystem means that people in rural and northern communities can actually access the service without long travel times and have reliable connectivity. So that would mean either through satellite or general other telecom means, as well as people with disabilities getting consistent, accessible digital experiences. And then newcomers and new families and young families can manage housing, education, and healthcare all in one place, no matter where they move. And that goes for every Canadian.
Yeah, I want to just pick up on two things you said there. I think we definitely, do have the foundations, and as more and more apps come out, I think interoperability is a key word that I really want to drive home. There needs to be a way for these platforms to interact and overlap with each other in a much more streamlined way, especially that, we're only going to continue growing in the digital space. So definitely something I want to emphasize. And a lot of great global examples that we can learn from, right? There are some incredible blueprints out there. We don't need to start from scratch. But we do need to start, keeping up. So definitely resonate and emphasize a lot of the points you made. But Dana, I want to give you the same kind of question. If is there kind of a public service that you can see, youth informed redesign being a critical part of, and I'll pass that off to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say I love hearing Ella talk because she takes these very complex problems and keeps it simple, silly, or the kids framework, which I think is helpful because, for instance, when the Liberal government put out their platform earlier this year in the election, they specifically said they were going to try to make streamlined services. And a really strong example that we could see for redesigned services for youth could be in broadband delivery in social tariff pricing, which already exists nowadays through ISED with the Connecting Families framework. However, it completely delineates youth from even being applicants because to be part of that program, you must either fully maximize your Canadian pension program, so you're a senior, or you have to be maximizing how the Canada Child Care Benefit package. So you have to be a parent, and it's most likely that youth would not be part of that, but would really benefit from social tariff broadband pricing for this. That's kind of like a clear example to build on that. But then how do we kind of get some of these youth perspectives in the room? Anthony was discussing this a bit earlier with youth councils. And so that's kind of actually where I want to really focus on because we can talk to exact scenarios like I just gave with a social tariff pricing model for broadband services. But that's, just one area. And we have a lot of different services that need some redesign for youth overall. So youth councils are part of a consultation process. They were originally developed in the United States as a reaction to the Vietnam War because of youth protests. And what they allow is for youth to have a seat at the table, essentially, and also engage with youth more broadly. So when we want to look at what a youth-informed redesign of, say, healthcare, education, or employment services, we need to first start thinking about how do we engage with stakeholders and how do we run a stakeholder consultation. Every stakeholder is different. I think over the past 10 years, stakeholder groups that there's been a lot more attention on some of the intricacies for engaging with have been Indigenous communities in Canada, for example, in person, building relationships, recognizing land rights, providing acknowledgement of the land. Like these are small steps that were taking place, and a lot of small steps and a lot more need to for it. But it goes to show of one stakeholder group that there has been this redesign for how communication consultations happened. In the youth aspect, we are also a stakeholder group, and this is kind of part of my advocacy at the UN as well coming through. But we need certain services that will then help us help change makers in redesigning programs for youth. For instance, youth councils are one, but they also need support. You're going to have to put up some money to fly in a diverse group of youth to meet a few times a year. So there are costs for that. You are also going to have to put away your ego a bit to allow for those youth to come together. There are also costs associated with that because it takes time of your day. There might be moments of that some of the directions that a youth council could provide might not be the most polished programs out there because they're not exactly the culmination of 20 years of a career. And so there does need to be this iterative process. But the key component that I just want to note is that if we want to redesign any services, there will be consultation necessary, and we need to recognize different stakeholder groups and how best to communicate with each of those groups and really get micro instead of just putting out a general forum, a general roundtable in a few town halls across the country where the same kind of speaking heads usually kind of come to those things because they were on the same listservs and the same newsletters and really get to Nick of putting boots on the ground and getting into communities.
Thank you, Dana. And again, I want to just pick up on something you said at the end there. I think communication styles at a granular level is, really important. It needs to go deeper than just, I think, a survey. Just again, collaboration and communication, I think, go hand in hand. So really strong points there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll transition to the last question in our first segment, and then we'll take any questions for this first period here. Anthony, I'm going to give you a pretty small question here to finish us off with, but what does one Canadian economy look like from your perspective, and what steps do we need to take to get there? And I think this last part is what I want to emphasize is what role can youth play? What role can we play and co-designing or helping build one Canadian economy? But I'll pass that off to you now.
Oh yeah, a very small question just to tie off this great segment. I think again, this is a very complicated issue. Like I spoke to earlier, there are some barriers in place that have been long-standing and very well might continue. I think from the youth perspective, what I want to see is I want to be able to live, work, and grow without limitation. And I think that goes back to fulfilling the promise, which is in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that all Canadians have the right to travel throughout the country. I think that goes hand in hand with this topic. I think that we're seeing premiers and the federal government in active discussion about what that could look like. All I do is I look at the poor city of Lloydminster, caught between Saskatchewan and Alberta, and Mayor Albers out there has been doing a great job at really giving great examples of the struggles they face because of those interprovincial trade barriers. One end of the city can't supply food to the other end of the city because they each operate under different food regulations. Is that not crazy to think of? And this has been long-standing. The city of Lloydminster is not a new municipality, and it has existed in the place that it's in for many decades. So it's something like that it almost just takes young people in a lot of ways, and we've done this throughout history, to stand up and say, this isn't making sense, do better. We've been getting, I think, not to speak generally, but young people have been very active in saying, we disagree with the way that this is going. We disagree with this in principle. Here's what we'd like to see. So no one can say that young people don't propose solutions, because we do. We do actively. There are many organizations that deal with young people. I'm thinking about Youth Ottawa here in Ottawa. I'm thinking of all kinds of other youth-based organizations that routinely supply vital solutions to our leaders and say, this would work better. And going back to Dana's point, sometimes the egos get in the way. Sometimes those leaders don't want to admit that they're wrong. Sometimes they don't want to admit that a young person is right. And that is going to continuously get in the way of this. So with respect to the One Economy plan or the One Canadian Economy, I think that steps are currently underway. It's a big topic in this segment. I want to see consult. We are the ones that will have to operate within this new structure as it adapts over the coming years. We were not put together overnight as a nation, and that's a whole other discussion. So it's going to take time for us to work through the new challenges that will present themselves under this new plan. And like my two other co-panelists for this segment, I want to see youth voices at that table.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony. All right, so we have a little bit of time left. I saw two questions come in, one through the chat, one through the Q&A. If you folks do have questions, please submit them through the Q&A button, which you should see at the bottom bar of the screen. The first question, Ella, I think was directed to you, and Dana, I saw you also dropped an answer in the chat, but it was in relation to, do we have those domestic firms that could develop digital systems that you describe, and those ones being, I think, how do we streamline, how do we enable interoperability? And Dana, I saw that, you had an answer. I think both of you could, semi tackle this. If one of you wants to go first, I'll let you take it away, but I think both of you could definitely touch on this.
I'll let Dana go for it.
Sounds good. I thought maybe that I've been marinating with it for a bit. So thanks for the question, Jeffrey. Overall, if you have interoperability as part of your procurement policy framework, any company should be able to just drop in and start working on things. I want to note that open is very different than interoperable, and sometimes they get conflated because open can have licensing associated with it, whereas interoperable, for example, if you had an interoperable social media platform, then you could maybe just have one social media account to one platform, which you really trust, but that you could still message and engage with contacts across various social media platforms instead of giving your data to all different ones. And it might create more social contracts between companies and us. As we all know, this is not happening in the digital world. However, we can adjust this to procurement policy. For example, Japan, another G7 nation, they put interoperable as part of any of their government services procurement policies. They have found in their studies, and mind you, this is about 10 years out of date, these studies. So I am speaking in out-of-date data. I just want to put an asterisk there. It provided more of a return on investment than their innovation-directed policies where they were giving money directly to firms. Procurement is a massive source of innovation development. So we don't need to just focus on Canadian companies for this. Obviously, we all want to see Canadian companies do well, and we want to see them scale to international markets. But the big aspect is having interoperability as a design feature to ensure that any company, whether they exist now or could exist in the future, could always jump on the bandwagon and be procured in an open procurement process.
Really, really good answer. And thanks again for providing, even though it's a bit out of date, I think having some data to provide context is really useful. So thanks for sharing that, Dana. Ellie, did you want to add anything or?
I really appreciated how you framed all of that. I will say I'm a little bit on the made in Canada side of things for a digital backbone per se. I think that we would need a national not-for-profit or a crown-backed consortium similar to maybe Sengen or Canary that operate today. Because we do have companies like CGI out of Montreal, OpenText, Blue Ink that are already developing the secure cloud digital ID and data sharing systems that we need. I think that a national organization, this is me personally thinking, could really bring together that government and academia to design those standards and ensure interoperability and test secure systems, because it really comes back to that data sovereignty side, which I know I'm going to harp on it later on, and I'm so sorry for that in advance. But I really think that would be keeping a lot of that infrastructure not only public, accountable, but domestically owned, which is huge right now.
Yeah, well said also. All right, I'm going to do one more question here that was submitted via our Q&A. So I'll read it out here. So adding onto the youth council discussion, a key requirement would be for the convener to actually put in place the recommendations put forward by youth. Do you think that the federal and provincial government, NGOs, and industry or at a place where they would implement youth ideas, even if it may seem ambitious or foreign to the current ways of thinking. So I think, Anthony, you had mentioned that, there are a lot of youth councils putting forward ideas. Uh, what might that barrier be to, actual implementation? Is it, risk aversion, ambition, different? And from my perspective, I think it's a difference in the way of thinking, and that's, a very big uphill battle across the board, not just youth. I think, changing ways of thinking, the ways we approach things, is a key factor. But if anybody wants to follow up on that, I want to give our panelists a chance here. Anthony, I see that you're unmuted if you wanted to.
Yeah, I think I can take a first stab at this one. So I'll also say to the other person who asked the question about municipalities, I'll be happy to type up an answer after we're done. So it's funny. So in one word, I would say political will, or in two words, I would say political will is the biggest barrier. Often young people propose changes that are unpopular, or at least unpopular for the certain segments of the population that our people in power care about. I mean, that's just the reality in which we live under our current system. We can have a separate panel entirely on proportional representation and what that could mean for Canada, but that's the system under which we currently operate. I would say to that person's point, and you make a very good point to say, well, whoever's responsible for that youth council should be responsible for seeing those recommendations through. And I entirely agree. The Prime Minister used to have a youth council. Throughout Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's tenure, he had a youth council every single year and every single mandate. That youth council was comprised of, I believe, about a dozen young people who would apply to sit on the youth council. But it was entirely informative. It was not consultative. So I think that's an important differentiation to make. It was treated as an informational body, not one that required consultation. So I almost think, similarly to how some industry associations tend to gather the deputy heads of all the major departments together, there almost needs to be a complete horizontal youth council that works with various members the Canadian bureaucracy. So I'm thinking various deputy ministers across all the relevant organizations. And that would likely see greater impact because the deputy ministers have a different mandate to those of ministers. And that's important to keep in mind here. Deputy ministers take the long-term vision. Ministers are there. The old saying is ministers are there for a day, DMs are there for a year. It's important to give those recommendations to the people that actually have a vested interest in seeing those applied. And that goes from the impact of having a non-elected coordinator or convener of some kind, whether it could, quite frankly, even be an independent senator. There's all kinds of options that could be explored in order to ensure the impartiality and the actual productivity of whatever body that would take. And I think I think to that person's point, it's very important that be a priority.
Dan, I saw you're unmuted. Did you want to say, I'll give you 1 minute and then we'll transition into our second segment here.
Yeah, one thing I would note with youth councils, some of the most successful ones are made in a bottom-up fashion in which youth first come together and then they slowly but surely get taken up in a more organizational facility. Like student governments are a really great example of this at universities and leadership clubs and see maybe department organizations when a student government is not really fulfilling the needs of certain faculty in those regards. What I will also notice, because the question had asked about essentially leadership culture, there are two types of organizations that will thrive with meaningful youth engagement. I'm saying meaningful to echo that what Anthony was just saying, that they're not informative. Like there is a meaningful aspect of the collaboration. You have two types of organizations, those that empower their youth employees to allow this bottom up, and those who assign duties to those youth to do this work themselves. So it's either bottom up or top down in a different respect, both of which need to be recognized, but it really is a first step by leaders of an organization to do so.
Awesome. Thank you for that follow-up, Dana. We'll now transition into our second segment, which focuses on productivity, innovation, and global competitiveness themes associated with the seven federal missions. So I will pose our first question to Drayton here as our entrepreneur in residence, I'll call him. What would you say keeps talented young people from staying in or returning to Canada? And what might that say about broader national priorities?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I was very excited to hop in. So the talent issue is definitely something that about all over the country, especially with what's going on right now. And to start it off, in my short but eventful entrepreneur journey, I've lost a lot of talent to some of these bigger companies, especially US companies. Fellow founders who have been in this for a while. There is this difference between um, companies that started pre-COVID and post-COVID. A big thing being remote work, right? So remote work really came into play and really accentuated after COVID. And this led to a lot of talent being able to work outside of the country from anywhere, which is really, really good for talent. Obviously, they were getting opportunities. But for Canada in particular, this meant that the big come and offer these um, co-op programs, internships of some sort during the time they're studying to these students, and look for these top students, which they then would offer these big packages after they're done their studies, which then would which would make Canada lose some of their talent. So I think that, for one, has been something that has changed the way this talent game works. And that's something that's important in both the solution, but also moving forward, that is something we need to be aware of as entrepreneurs, as companies that are growing. Another piece that definitely has gotten a lot of our companies to lose out on talent is the ecosystem surrounding entrepreneurship here in Canada and the way different institutions support entrepreneurs and ventures and of the sort. There's a really cool example that I was reading on the University of Waterloo. They have a really, really interesting sort of solution where they mimic a lot of the institutions in the US where they actually invest in some of their students and some of their founders who have these bright ideas. And the idea is because they're investing and they're at the cap tables, this means that they are invested in pouring talent into some of these companies that are up and coming. So this means that these companies almost have a certainty of having the top talent from this Canadian university, at their firms and making sure that they can compete at that internet at that global level. So this is new and is not as common here in Canada, but that University of Waterloo is really trying to change things up on this end. And a big part of why it's not very common is obviously there is this government and post-secondary institution relationships that isn't as mature as what it looks like in the US, where there's a lot more incentives from the post-secondary aspect of actually making these investments, whether it's the structure that are not in place. There's a lot of need for more regulations and more kind of like generally putting out outlined, guess, step-by steps for these post-secondary institutions to follow as to go and take equity pieces in some of their companies. But again, University of Waterloo is doing a great job at this because with their whole creator-owned IP that they have going on, where, as an innovator, you can go to the university, you can start your own thing and still own that part of, own everything that you're working on. It gives freedom and it allows for multiple, more entrepreneurs to just create things without the fear of their ideas being stolen. So if we can, find ways to encourage these institutions, give them more incentives, give them more support through policy to then create these venture arms, which would then reinvest in their talent and the support, which, at the end of the day, once these entrepreneurs are successful and they have their, they have their big exits, they are, they come back to these universities, they do reinvest back into these funds, as we've seen done successfully in the US. So I think really creating this flywheel of, federally supporting post-secondary institutions that then allows them to invest in their founders, which gives them access to the talent, and then kind of creating the cycle is something that I think would be a first step to solving this talent issue. But I think we're getting there. We have a lot of the pieces. We just need to, reformulate what that looks like in terms of the general structure. But yeah, those are the main things that I think, the system can focus on in terms of solutions for our talent issue.
Great answer. And again, I'll quickly pick up on, I think, shifting resources and investing more in, a talent pipeline, especially while people are in post-secondary, is huge, especially because, there's been a huge pause on international student intake in colleges across the country. So I think shifting resources and shifting strategies to, again, build those long-term connections where, you invest in entrepreneurs and talent today. And as you said, if you keep that investment going, they're, more likely to come back and partner, whether it's for a program, in kind, or financial support. So, that is a restructuring that I think has definitely, had the spotlight shed on it. So agreed with you there. Shifting to kind of innovation, I think talking about, AI has become super relevant, and who better to ask than Dana here, but is there a role for AI in making government more effective for youth? And if so, what are some of those challenges and opportunities associated with that?
Thanks for the question, Alex. First and foremost, we need to note that AI can either be a productivity enhancer or a diminisher of it. For example, workplaces are now reported is slowing down their processes because these employees have not had effective AI training or overall digital literacy enhancing environments. When we think about government using AI, I want to discuss how it's not just AI, but a broader suite of digital tools which need to be utilized to make government more effective for youth. As every government employee knows, Microsoft Office, and this is not a plug for them, but Office 365 tends to be the software of choice across departments. However, it is heavily underutilized in government spaces who have access to it. For instance, a key issue that a lot of government agencies have is duplication of work, decentralization of teams doing this duplicate work, and therefore running double budgets and redundant costs that would have otherwise been diminished if there was better communication amongst public servants. Prior to AI in an Office 365 suite, you can legitimately create a Microsoft Teams for certain topics to asynchronously update your workplace on what you're working on. You can update your Microsoft Dell profile weekly about what you've completed to date for your subject matter expertise and what you're working on that given week. And so you didn't need AI to find out if two employees were doing the same work. You just need to add a digital literacy component in the workplace process of trying to have transparent and clear communications about your deliverables, which anyone in your department can review. Now, when I was a public servant from 2021 to 2023, it was always clear that younger employees were a lot more savvy with these technologies and willing to work across the software tools to enhance their work than some of the older employees. And this probably isn't as surprising to most people, as it is a trend that youth are more likely to be technology adopters than older generations who build their careers on totally different systems, and might have a hard time making these big digital switches. So I like to kind of think of things in a more of a compassionate lens on that than saying that youth know how to do everything else does, because that's just not true. We have different working lives that we've matured in. However, but with this new AI shift in the workplace, you can enhance some of the digital tools that you might have previously been using. So, for example, if you have all of your files in your cloud, then you can ask your AI assistant is anyone in my workplace doing something along these lines? I don't really know exactly what the topic we're looking at. It might have been called other things in different contexts, but help me out here. And it can. But you have to start first with everything in cloud, everything updated regularly, and just not saving to your desktop as the big one. So, again, government services across the board that can be more beneficial and effective for youth, they need to start by just making sure that they're utilizing the tools they already have, especially before you go and spend like millions of dollars on procurement of AI systems. Like just use what you've got first. Because we need to not think of AI as a chicken or egg situation of embedding it into government, but instead knowing that there is a clear beginning with using the current existing digital tools and then garnishing the enhanced processes with AI for government to be more effective.
Thank you for that answer. And I'm smiling because I couldn't agree more. I think using the tools we have access to now is huge. And I think that, has been the case even before AI even came along, a suite of tools to actually, work with before you're investing millions and millions of dollars is step one. So agreed with you there. And on the last kind of component of segment two on global competitiveness, Drayden, I'll turn it back to you here. How can youth entrepreneurs and subject matter experts, be better embedded into global value chains, not just as suppliers, but as co-innovators? So, quite a big question, but I'll pass it off to you here.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I think it really comes back to this, being an entrepreneur in the university setting has given me this really interesting kind of experience because as a university student, already there's like a lot of excitement for your studies, especially if you're engaged in your student, different student bodies and things like that. But being an entrepreneur, you get to see that there's a lot of these groups and smaller communities that are, obviously promoting ideas and sparkling a lot of excitement. I know, I don't know, Ella, if you've gotten the chance to attend one of these like AI Tinkerers events and things like that kind of energy is the top, thing that you want when you are building entrepreneurship, especially into these different ecosystems, right? So I feel like for me as an entrepreneur, and I know a lot of other entrepreneurs feel the same, the ability to recreate this sort of um, companionship surrounding ideas being a good thing, risk being a good thing, in some sort of like incubation format, is what goes to create those big ideas, which then gives confidence to these founders to build ideas and grow at a global level. But another component that I think Canada in particular has is we have access to a lot of grants and a lot of funding opportunities for startups. But oftentimes these things are publicly available information, I would say. So you find that a lot of these startups are always looking, okay, where can I go for funding? And their first thoughts are always, oh, let me go get some investment. Let me register for my angel network thing and see if I can pitch an idea. But before that, there's so much funding available. So if on top of creating that ecosystem and that community of entrepreneurs that is vibrant, being able to also connect those pieces, those people who are at the programs like MyTax or like IRAP, and finding ways to bring those people to the table in this community in a vibrant way as well. Because I think when people think about government programs and anything government, they just think, oh, these guys are like boring things on the side and they're really here to ruin the fun. But I think if we can find a way to create that, Invest Ottawa's here in Ottawa, it has started to do so. We can definitely create that ecosystem, which would then add more value to the Canadian ecosystem in that global chain.
Agreed. Strongly agreed there. All right, we will take one quick question here. Ella, I will throw this one to you. If you could kind of just do a 1 or 2 minute answer to it, as I feel like you're best positioned to answer it. Can you talk about entrepreneurship and innovation outside of universities for youth that have left the university ecosystem? I know that, incubators are really embedded within post-secondary and, they have a big home there across globally. I think that's the case. As Drayton was mentioning, MyTax is a huge program. I've had the chance to travel across the world and found that these incubators are embedded within post-secondary, and it is a good home there. But outside of that, what is there for youth? Where might they actually find that support? So I'll throw that one to you, Ella.
Thank you. And I find that that's a really great question. Oh no, I wanted to have that. Sorry, I wanted to have it in front of me so I could look at it as well. So I find that a lot of on the entrepreneurship and innovation side for youth, people don't realize what's out there. And I think that's one of the biggest shortcomings that we have in Canada in total is we don't broadcast what we have. We tend to keep a lot of things closer to our chest, or we're like, well, somebody will find it. We need to actually showcase what we're doing in the ecosystems and how we're supporting that entrepreneurship and innovation side. I also am going to plug in Invest Ottawa here. We do a lot of work on supporting businesses from I have an idea on a napkin all the way up to multi-million-dollar scale-ups. And that can be through tech, that can be through mortar and brick and mortar businesses. It's really that side of knowing what's out there and learning what's out there and finding what you're passionate in. So within the university system, I find that it's very constrained to the academia side and you're focused on the research angle. Whereas in the broader ecosystem, at least from an Ottawa standpoint, it's more on building out certain capabilities that you're doing and enabling yourself for scale up and commercialization. And there's organizations like the Canada North Business Association that can support you and connect you with people. Invest Ottawa is a great connector. There's SendGen, which is a national network for the connectivity side of things. If you're looking to do more prototyping and such, and really focusing in on that training side, CMC Fabric, they have a fantastic system where they actually just launched their challenge yesterday, I believe, on the IoT devices and edge computing for AI. And their challenges that come out that inspire companies and entrepreneurs to really take that next step in that journey. And keeping track of where the priorities are on the government side, so you know where to kind of chase the funding, I find is also a very important tactic. But really, once you leave the university system, you still have those connections, and those connections then can branch out further than I think many people would expect. And connecting with your local ecosystems and your economic development agencies, be that in BC, Quebec, anywhere, I think that could be really great.
Yeah,
I'll share those in the chat.
Yeah, I'll emphasize what Ella said. Definitely leaning into your connections once you leave the ecosystem. There is a very large network of individuals and fewer private organizations. But again, Invest Ottawa. If you're based in Ottawa, Ella is definitely your point of contact. So definitely reach out to her and she'll point you in the right direction. That being said, we will now shift to our third and final segment, which is focusing on sovereignty, safety, and resilience themes of the mission areas. So I will toss this first question to Anthony. But what does sovereignty mean to you? I think, sovereignty we associate with defense. I think that's the biggest association that a lot of people have in mind. But beyond that, digital sovereignty, food security, or economic independence, what is a component of sovereignty that, stands out to you and you feel will be, more important in the coming years, especially from a youth perspective?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that this question has been on everyone's mind since President Donald Trump took office in January. Shortly thereafter, Canada was victim to not so much threats, but some language that may have been inflammatory deliberately with respect to our geographical sovereignty. So for myself, I would say sovereignty takes two forms. First and foremost, it's our geographic sovereignty. Canada has existed as the nation that it is currently for over 150 years, and we operate within a very, very thorough system of checks and balances and things of that nature. So for me, sovereignty first and foremost starts with having control over Canada, and that Canada run by those who live within Canada, and I think that is paramount. And without that, you can't have any of the others. Secondarily to that, I think it's economic sovereignty, and we're seeing that currently with the Buy Canadian plan, as well as the reshoring, should we say, of certain industries and vital aspects of our supply chain. The federal government has come out very recently and announced that we will be undertaking, or at least expediting, certain nation building projects. I think that is a phenomenal first step towards securing that economic sovereignty, especially at a time where we clearly have a belligerent neighbor down south. It's very important for Canada to take this opportunity and invest where we need to, because that's going to set us up for a very prosperous future. We are smaller in terms of population when compared to the US, but we are the second largest country by land size in the world. And that's an important thing to note, because it takes a long time for us to get goods from one end of our country to another. To ship a Ford F-150 from Oakville to Victoria, BC, takes a considerable amount of time. And it's very important to include that in our considerations. Now, with respect to youth and the role that I believe that youth could play in all of this, it's just supporting those projects and supporting anything that would emphasize and reinforce our sovereignty. We, as youth, we have a variety of considerations, and we are not monolithic. And some of us will care more about on the poll at the beginning of this exact session, this exact panel, where we saw that there was a clear that it was housing and but economic sovereignty and economic affairs actually was lower on the poll. I saw it was sitting at about 6%. And I think that's an important distinction, because without economic sovereignty, you cannot have the other points of sovereignty. So it's very important for youth to be clear and intentional in what we're putting forward, and to support the projects. And not everybody agrees with building a pipeline. That's not always a very popular issue, but put into the context of the current issues that we're facing with respect to sovereignty, it becomes a very popular problem, because we need to be able to have that infrastructure to power our country. And so I'll leave it on that, but I think it's just not sacrificing the big picture of small picture priorities. I think that's a good way of putting it.
Agreed with that hand gesture, Ella. I definitely think we can't let go of that big picture sight. And also, good point on, I think economic sovereignty is something that the conversation needs to come back to, because as we saw at the start of this year, we were basically cut off at the legs, and that was a pretty aggressive wake-up call, and a call to action across both public and private sector. So definitely leaning into economic sovereignty as well. And Ella, I'll pose the same question to you. What does sovereignty mean to you beyond just defense? And
I really think that sovereignty today isn't about lines on a map. It's about who controls the critical technology in data that our society runs on. Once again, bringing back that digital data side of things, I gave you full warning, everyone. Every phone call, really every hospital visit, vehicle on the road, pretty much depends on semiconductors. For those of you not familiar with semiconductors, they're little microchips, maybe smaller than the size of your pinky fingernail, and they act really as the brains of modern life. And they power everything from your smartphone to satellites, medical imaging systems, 5G network, you name it. When global supply chains really collapsed during COVID, I think that that was a huge turning point where we saw how critical certain areas of and how vulnerable really certain supply chains were globally. Car manufacturers in Southern Ontario, for example, had vehicles sitting on the assembly line waiting for chips, just a few, not even hundreds, just maybe 5 or so. And that it wasn't a logistics problem. It really was a sovereignty wake-up call, in my opinion, because here in Canada, we really design world-class hardware, telecoms, photonic technologies, and we still import most of these core components. Meanwhile, the US really has its CHIPS Act, though it's kind of been a little bit gutted under President Trump. Europe has the CHIPS Joint Undertaking, and Asia has billions of dollars on the fabrication incentive side. And Canada, we really can't afford to stay a consumer in a market that defines national resilience like that. And where this brings in the youth side is we're at a pivotal point within our ecosystem, and specifically on the talent side. We have about a 15-year gap, or 15-year window, sorry, where we need to train the talent of tomorrow, today, with the talent that was trained in the giants and the legacy that was Nortel, Mitel, and such, and making sure that that talent stays in Canada and is trained in a way that there is that generational handoff. And I think that that's where youth come into this conversation around sovereignty, is we are the people that are going to be inheriting this bureaucracy. And we need to understand that even though, for example, Ottawa's hardware semiconductor cluster generated 12.6 billion in national output last year and had over 48,000 jobs, yes, across the country. All of that fabrication really happens abroad. And if we want a true digital and technological sovereignty, we need to build a more valid and sovereign supply chain and value chain here at home. And that's where the youth come in from, talking from it's not about our policy, it's our reality. We're growing up in a fully digital economy where our data, devices, decisions on foreign infrastructure and everything are happening not in Canada. Let's be honest. Protecting Canada now means that we're protecting our data, designs, and domestic capacity to produce. How many things are, and this goes back to a little bit of the last conversation of how many youth are innovating in these companies, but their IP and all of these designs are leaving and going towards multinationals, or they're leaving Canada because there's not the same opportunities here. I think that that's what we need to work on. It's digital sovereignty at its basis. It doesn't mean closing borders. It means building strength at home through talent so that we can collaborate globally with confidence and supporting companies that are enabling that talent. Sorry, that was a little bit rambly, but I appreciate the
No,
time.
I agree more. I think digital and data sovereignty is going to play a huge part, and it's not something that can be overlooked. I think there's definitely a huge level of awareness that needs to be raised. I think not enough people understand the role that it plays and the role it would continue to play. So I'm glad you spotlighted that, Ella. And for the last kind of question of segment 3, Dana, I'll pass it over to you before we kind of close out this discussion. But what could become a whole of government approach to sovereignty, which would allow Canadians to be a part of our sovereign future? How can we help contribute to that?
Yes, I think Anthony and Ella touched on quite a few components. Like we need IP ownership. We also need to have a skills-based economy. So for years, there has been a national conversation about Canada's productivity, for instance, that it's in decline, and this is a huge problem. Canada's productivity issue, however, is not in the professional services segment of our economy, it's in the manufactured goods. So what does this tell us? Essentially, we need to redesign our economy to a skills-based economy where we own our own IP and away from a goods-based one, since this is where we exceed, as demonstrating. But that can have political problems. It can also have political opportunities. For instance, a service can't be tariffed. A good can be tariffed. So that's kind of a shift. But more on that kind of political issue that I want to highlight a bit of an example to help contextualize this for the audience. So, for example, I'm from Alberta originally. I live in Toronto now. I will likely always stay in Toronto, but I'm originally from Alberta. And you'll meet people that when you ask, oh, what kind of work do you do? They just reply, I'm in oil and gas. It's not, I do marketing for an energy company, or I am a contract welder, usually on oil rigs. It's just oil and gas, ONG. And it really goes to show the focus on the output good. So we need a cultural shift to instead talk about the skill or service. So building on this example, we can think of oil drilling and fracking. Drilling has been perfected by oil companies and frackers, and it's a major skill in developing the future of our digital economy because fiber optic cables, which are built into existing cities by private companies as a means of meeting the data needs that Ella was speaking about of businesses and individual users, require horizontal drilling to get fiber into the ground cheaply, as over 90% of the cost associated with laying fiber comes from digging up that ground. So if you can instead horizontally drill from just one, massively reduce the costs associated with developing a high capacity broadband backbone across communities in this country. And you also create green jobs from a transferable skill. So, but this requires a cultural shift and a whole of government policy approach that youth can be at the forefront of. So you would need Canadians at large to focus on their marketable skill across sectors and the IP that they might be adjusting and just making small micro adjustments to something that has already been done before, and then trademarking that. And applying patents and making sure that they own that skill in and of its entirety. You would then need government approaches to ensure that everyone becomes a highly skilled labor in a specific skills vertical. So kind of what was being spoken to earlier, for instance, by Drayton at universities, like that's a really good starting ground. Or even what Ella was saying in the last segment regarding what next when you're at the other end of the university ecosystem that a question also brought up. So you would need governments to put up some funds to making sure that there are these transitions from the goods to the skills and working across levels of government and departments. So, in my example of oil and gas, for instance, and drilling, well, you would need the federal government to work in tandem as well with the provinces, for instance, there. So, you need that whole of multi governments approach to sovereignty. You would also need different departments, such as like industry, economic development, infrastructure departments, broadband funds in my specific example earlier, and I'm leaving out a lot of other ones for the sake of time. But as a country, and where youth can really be at the forefront of is really starting that adjustment in what we want our economy to be shaped under. So instead of always focusing on goods, focusing on skills, and then making sure that when skills are perfected and any new adjustments to the way skills can be demonstrated, in my case example, that we have that cultural shift so that we can have a sovereign economic future for our country.
Really interesting example. And again, I think that always helps contextualize and give the audience a better understanding of directions we can go. So really appreciate that. So for the sake of time, what we will do is there are some questions in the chat and in the Q&A segment. If any of our speakers would like to answer those via chat, that would be great. But in the next 5 minutes, what I'd love to do is from each of our speakers providing a closing remark. And the question I'll ask is, if you have 1 minute with a federal minister, and Anthony, you may be a deputy minister in this case, because again, you mentioned long-term vision, so that might be more appropriate. But, what would you ask them to do first and why? So I guess in terms of priorities and your reason behind it, if anybody wants to kind of take it away with that first, I will let you raise your hand and answer it. And also, we do have questions in the chat. So if on the side anybody wanted to provide an answer in the chat, that would be much appreciated. But Anthony, I'll let you start us off here.
I think first and foremost, I would say listen to young people. Period. And I would add on to that there are many ways that you can have a voice. There are many ways, whether you're involved in politics or you are a nonpartisan person, there are many ways that you can interact with these folks, especially if they are your local members of parliament. Challenge them, ask them questions, ask them the tough questions, ask them what they're doing to support young people. We each and every person who lives in Canada has a representative called a member of parliament, and that person sits in the parliament, in the House of Commons. That person may also be part of the government. It depends on where you're living. And if they are, you have enormous access. You need to use that. I think more and more young people need to engage in that kind of dialogue with their elected representatives.
Thank you, Anthony. Agreed, and very short and sweet and to the point. Awesome. All right. Ella, Dana, or Drayton. Ella, I see your mic's off. Go for it.
Go for it. I think if I had 1 minute, and first off, Anthony, that was amazing. And I think, though, for myself, I'd ask them to really invest in Canada's hardware, semiconductor, and that advanced manufacturing supply chain for the security of it, because this is not just an industry issue. It's not just, it's really a future of youth issue. We already have incredible assets like the Canadian Photonic Fabrication Center in Ottawa, and we have corridors for hardware and manufacturing across the country, but they're oversubscribed and underfunded. And expanding assets like CPFC and creating regional fabrication hubs would let young innovators design, prototype, and build here at home instead of sending their ideas and IP and their careers abroad. And this is really about keeping that talent in Canada, training that talent. Because when you have someone that is going into like a STEM program or the trades, when they have access to the tools, the mentorship, and the infrastructure that they need, and it's accessible to them in either the language or at the affordability side, they can then build the technologies that keep our country secure and competitive. And for our generation, it really seems like the choice is clear. We can either rent out our future from others, or we can really invest in the capacity to build it ourselves.
Really strong points. Drayton.
Yeah, to kind of go off of what Ella was saying there, the investment in what we currently have, I think, is really key. I think Canada is filled with a lot of bright minds, of innovators and creative individuals. And if we can find ways to, one, promote what we currently have in terms of resources, on what's available, and two, look for creating those better ways to make our ecosystem more more intriguing and more interesting for other people to want to be a part of, and more fun as well. I think as young people, we are going into this new world that's being open to us is filled with a lot of problems that we're gonna have to solve eventually. Like, these are things that we're inheriting, and we are more than capable to do that. We just need to be given the right spaces and ecosystem and support to take care of that. So that would be my 1 minute. Maybe not a minute, but yeah.
No, absolutely no. I think a more interconnected ecosystem, and I think that's again a theme, interoperability, more interconnection across networks and ecosystems is key for us to be able to mobilize and actually move forward. Agreed there. And Dana, I'll let you close us off here.
I think mine's a bit more short, sweet, and potentially funny. I would say reduce the size of your staffs. There are way too many staffers in each of these ministers' offices, and it reduces the capacity for these people to be closer to the problems and to the people that they are impacting. And that really has a huge difference for youth who might not have the patience to be going through constant emails with and jumped from staffer to staffer when you really need that direct line to an elected official. The second point that I would probably make in line with that is stop making everything into a media moment. We as youth can see right through all of that. We did not social media, at least on the Gen Z side, the millennials did, but we definitely perfected it. Every policy doesn't need an announcement. We don't need armies of people for a photo op for everything. Just get on with the work. That's what we as youth care about. So that's my 2 cents.
Oh, straight into the point. I love that. Well, I want to just thank all of our speakers for sharing their insights today and the questions from our audience. Before I pass it back off to Jeff and Meredith to close us off, I just wanted to briefly discuss ICI's youth strategy. Today was really step one in what we hope to keep building on. And it all begins with, again, engaging youth on nationally relevant missions to really initiate that discussion around co-design. So thank you, everybody, again, for being a part of this really first stepping stone towards what we hope will grow into something even larger. Phase two is something we're working on actively and hope to really execute in later this fall and throughout the early parts of next year. We're actively developing a recurring youth series as well as a policy hackathon. And the concept behind that is similar to regular hackathons. We'll have a policy issue presented to youth where they will have the opportunity to co-design that in partnership with a policy mentor or an industry expert. And again, really take that co-design to the next level. And in 2026, again, really having a National Youth Council of Canada. And as for that, we're still, actively playing around with some ideas. And Dana, I think you said it earlier, but it needs to start from bottom up, right? And I think that's what we're really trying to do here by having the discourse first, seeing where that alignment is, and building from there. And as I think all of you had mentioned, there's some incredible youth organizations out there. So I think a National Youth Council also will require a lot of collaboration. And that being said, if there's anybody on this call who would be interested in co-design, interested in participating in future events, please don't hesitate to reach out or follow us across all of our platforms to just stay tuned on these next components. And with that being said, I'm going to release one more poll, which will be just asking again, which of the based on today's conversation, is there an area which you would like to see more discussion taking place or you feel would benefit from further development? So I'll just put that up on the screen really quickly so everybody can access the link, and then I'll pull it down to give the close to Meredith and Jeff over here. So if everybody could just take a quick moment to, again, provide their insights on what you want to see more of in the future, that will really help us next two phases here. So I'll leave that up just for a couple more seconds. I see that we have some participants typing, which is awesome. Canada's digital backbone, 100%. I think that is a spotlight area that stood out for me today as well. Would love to see more of housing, town development. Okay, that's great. What I'll do is I think enough people have the link now, so I will stop sharing my screen and pass things back to Meredith to close us off here.
You go first.
Okay. Uh, First of all, thanks so much. This has been amazing. I'm just going to close the window here. Anthony and Ella and Dana and Drayton and Alex, you vindicated our choice of doing a youth webinar. Your insights have been very, very insightful insights. And I invite you to write op-eds for Research Money. We have a readership of well over 3,500 people from government and some of the people you want to reach. You have great ideas. So if you're interested, get in touch with me. Alex, you're a fantastic moderator. We'll probably be tapping into you for our next conference. Research Money will be at CSPC 2025 next month as a partner. Thanks, Meredith, again. So make sure to visit us at our booth. And the 25th Annual Research Money Conference will take place in Ottawa in the spring. Watch for details on our website. It's www.researchmoneyinc.com, and you can sign up to our free newsletter, Innovation This Week, where all our announcements come out every week. So again to everyone, and thanks to Mehrdad, I pass it over to you to close. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so very much, Jeff and Alex and all the panelists for this very insightful panel conversations. And I really looking forward to future conversations. And I know that Alex, the work is continuing. And on behalf of CSBC, we are happy to continue our engagement on this project and making sure that we are part of this conversation and our platform is ready to be used by youth on this very important topic anyway. So we will continue this conversation. And like Jeff, a few self-promotion lines. As you know, the Canadian Science Policy Conference happening in November 19th to 21st. Please make sure that everyone register for the conference. There will be around 300 speakers, 60 plus panels, and innovation-related panels this year. One of the highlights of the conference is that we receive a lot of proposals, innovation-related. Please take a look at the website, sciencepolicy.ca, and the conference website, CSPC2025.ca, and the agenda. And I think the feedback poll is already sent. There is no need to send it again, if I'm not mistaken. Excellent. Okay. So with that, I want to ask you please to register for our newsletter. Very much looking forward to continue our engagement in this conversation. And once again, thank you all the panelists for insightful conversation. Thanks to CSPC volunteers for and the event committee to put this event. And thanks to Jeff and our excellent collaboration with Research Money. Looking forward to that. Alex, over to you if you want to say.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, I'll close this off. There will be a recording provided after this. So steps, what everybody can expect is there is going to be a brief that will be developed that really summarizes the key points made by all of our speakers here today. And that will be distributed in the next couple of weeks. And again, the invitation to collaborate on these next steps is open. Please reach out to anybody at CSPC, myself, or Research Money, and we will keep this conversation going. To our speakers, again, this is definitely really appreciated. You are helping, in this first phase of what we hope to grow into something even larger. So I will definitely be in touch with you as we move forward. And yeah, just a big thank you. 3 minutes to spare. I'm glad we're on time. And everybody enjoy the rest of your days. Yeah, that's all I got. Thank you, guys.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.